Well, over the last few days, I have been blessed, and I'm very thankful that we have had an opportunity to reacquaint ourselves with one another for those of us that were together earlier on in life. It's been a blessing and a wonderful experience, and I am thankful to the brethren who have brought me here, and I cannot say thanks enough. But everything that we have done here, we have done not unto our own glory, but to God's glory. All the things that we've said and all the things that we've been focused on have not been about us. It's been about God. It's been about us and our relationship with God and putting Him first in all things. I have to say something about somebody that is here this morning. And I think it's important to point out that this is kind of an emotional thing for me to see Ethel Walker. There's a very good possibility if things had not worked out the way that they did, that I would not have had a chance to see her sweet face again on this earth. Now, I can be sure that I will see her sweet face in heaven. And all of those that are here, we should all want to have that same feeling about being in the same place with people that we love so much, that have been such an important part of this congregation, sharing the gospel to this community, and just a good friend and example to all. So thankful. We're going to read, again, Matthew 11, starting in verse 28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Everything that we have brought forth in this sermon series has been about carrying too much weight. And I was just thinking about, as we were partaking of the Lord's Supper, have you ever taken a moment to consider how much weight Jesus carried on the cross for all of the sins of mankind? If we think that our sins and our lives is a heavy burden, how do you think Jesus felt? Not just past, everyone from the beginning to where we are right now in the future. People that we haven't even met, that don't even exist right now. What an amazing thing to think about who Jesus is in that regard. And it helps us to understand why He's able to say this to us. Because His weight on the cross was better than anybody that has lived here. More than anybody that's ever lived here. And we think about it from the perspective of that, and it should help us be humbled when we think about Him and what it is that we mean to Him, and that He was willing to give Himself up for us. I want to tell you about the moments when I didn't think I could give anymore. The pressures of work life, having assumed perhaps more than was needed, chasing something that was taking away time from God, the responsibilities of being a person who showed up and served and did the needful and still felt exhaustion about all of it. The challenges with children, family matters, the demands on our time, the responsibilities of filling empty roles in the congregation where we might attend because it was needed and because God called us to do it. But there have been moments when it was too much. When the work to be done was more than my wife and I could actually hold in our hands. We sometimes felt like this was more than we could handle and wanted to go back to what we called just being like you are in the pew. Listening, receiving. But we're called to more than that, aren't we? We're called to more than just sitting in the pew. We're called to give everything that we have. And sometimes we hold on to things in the world, we've talked about it over the last few days, that we should not be holding on to. I want to be careful how I frame what it is that I just said, because I want you to know that it's not a complaint. I'm not complaining about those things. What I'm saying about those things is they're real. And I think we can all be honest with one another and confess that there are things that we face in this life that bring us down. Maybe there are things in our past that have brought us down. Maybe there are things in our future that we haven't seen yet that are going to bring us down. But the only way that we can be lifted up whenever we have been pushed down by the cares of this world is through Jesus. And he's given us a yoke. And we're going to talk about that yoke this morning. We're going to talk about it all, how it all ties together. Everything that we've been talking about since the very beginning. What we just read just a moment ago, Matthew 11:28 through 30, we're going to read it one more time. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already memorized this verse, to memorize it. It is a verse to stay in your heart every day. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. 2 words describe the people he was calling: labor, exhausting toil, effort expended past the point of comfortable sustainability. The person who is not just busy but spent, nothing left. Have you been in those moments before? Have you felt those moments? Heavy laden, loaded down with cargo. Both words are active. They are not people who were once burdened and recovered. They are people in the middle of carrying something right now. Jesus does not tell them to lighten the load before they come. He doesn't say, come to me all who have resolved your issues. He says, come as you are, laboring, heavy laden, and the rest begins at the coming. But these alongside loads that we've been talking about need names. Because if we come to Jesus still carrying those things, the yoke is not going to feel easy. The weight of what is strapped alongside will make every step heavier than the yoke alone would require. And the cargo you brought with you to the yoke is not always obvious from the inside. It accumulates quietly. It often arrives wearing clothes of faithfulness. We've spent 5 evenings, a few evenings, 2 evenings, 2 evenings, and 2 mornings. I'll get that right one of these days. We've named these things. Shame is not something that we like to talk about, but shame needs to be released. The self that has not been denied. The idol wearing God's name in the silence God was meant to fill. The grievance and leaving things that need to be left behind. The trial pulled open before the cocoon could complete its work. None of those 5 things is the yoke. Every one of them is alongside. And if we were carrying all of these alongside loads, we're not experiencing the yoke as easy because we're not experiencing the yoke alone. We need to experience it alone. So let's talk about what the yoke actually is. Jesus doesn't leave the image abstract. Think about who he was talking to. He was talking to people who understood what the yoke was. We don't use yokes now today very often. So we need to understand a little bit about history so we can understand a little bit about how it applies to us. The yoke in the first century agricultural world was a wooden frame fitted across the necks of 2 working animals. It did not eliminate the load. It distributed the load. And the critical feature of a paired yoke was the relationship between the 2 animals wearing it. An experienced animal yoked with the young one set the pace, absorbed the turns, knew the field, the furrow, the end of the row. The inexperienced animal did not carry the load alone. They carried it together. The weight the experienced one absorbed meant the learner was never at the limit of their capacity. Notice what the inexperienced animal does in that pairing. It absorbs the turns the younger one would have taken too sharply. It knows the end of the row before the young one does. So the young one does not panic when the field looks endless from the middle. It sets a pace the young one can match. The yoke is not the load. The yoke is what makes the load shareable. with somebody who knows what they are doing. But sometimes what we do is we try to do our own thing. And in doing that, we think that we can hold the yoke on our own. That we can plow our own fields. That we can set our own pace. That we can absorb our own turns. And that just makes us exhausted in life, doesn't it? And I can say this, I was that person trying to do it on my own. I didn't really understand what the yoke was. I didn't really think about the fact that the yoke was there to help me understand my relationship with God and also to define the work that I was supposed to be doing. But one of the things that I think that's most important about this is Jesus names what it is that the yoke is. Gentle and lowly in heart. When we put it on, we're aside somebody who loves us and cares for us and wants us to go through this process to get to the place where the harvest is ready. Gentle describes the one whose strength is under control. That word lowly is an interesting word. We should be thoughtful about what it means. The strength that's under control. Who does not drive the animal yoke beside them past the point of sustainable effort? Jesus is not going to push us harder than we can go on our own. He knows how we go. He knows what our strengths are. He knows what our weaknesses are. In yoking ourselves with Jesus, we were able to move in places that we didn't know we could move. And to become someone that we did not know we would become. He's not a taskmaster. He is the one who knows the field. The yoke is easy, well-fitting, suited to the one wearing it. The burden is light. The weight the yoke actually places on the person in it, rather than the weight they have been carrying without. Jesus is not saying the path has no difficulty. He is saying the instrument he provides distributes the weight in a way that the person can sustain. But the instrument requires an exchange. You have to let go of something to put it on. The person coming to the yoke must put down what they have been carrying in order to take up what he is offering. You cannot exchange what you will not put down. If you come to the yoke still carrying the load you brought with you, you have not made the exchange. You have added the yoke to what you were already carrying, and the result is a heavier burden than before, which produces the conclusion that the yoke doesn't work. When what has not happened is the prior release that makes the substitution possible. The rest Jesus promises is not added to the weight, it replaces it. But the replacing requires the putting down. So let's talk about this. What is driving the wearing? There is one more question underneath the yoke that needs to be named, not a question about a load, but a question about the driver. Two people can wear the same yoke and have an entirely different experience of it because what is driving the wearing is different. As an example, a laborer and a prisoner can do the same work. The difference is what drives it. If you're wearing the yoke as an obligation, because the rules require it, because the community expects it, because the consequences of not wearing it are visible and uncomfortable, you may be a prisoner to doing labor. The yoke is real and the work is real and the field gets covered, but the wearing is compelled, not chosen. The wearing is compelled, not chosen. And compelled wearing is experienced as burden regardless of the actual weight of the load. How do you feel about things you have to do? Oh, I've got to do this drudgery. That's not what Jesus is calling us to, is it? The yoke is real and the work is real and the field gets covered, but the wearing is compelled, not chosen. And compelled wearing is experienced as burden regardless of the actual weight of the load. The prisoner is exhausted by work. The free person finds sustainable because the exhaustion is not primarily physical. It is the exhaustion of a will pressed into service without being asked. I want you to turn with me to 1 John 5:3. 1 John 5:3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Tell you what, do we wake up every day thinking that? That what God has set before us is not burdensome? That following what it is that we've been given freedom to do through Jesus Christ is burdensome? The commandments are not burdensome, and the ground that statement stands on is the sentence before it. This is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. Why do we do what we do? The keeping is the expression of the love, the overflow of it. The person who loves God keeps his commandments. The way a person who loves someone keeps the things that matter to the one they love. Because the love has converted the obligation into something else. We're not obliged to love. For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died, and he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him, who for their sake died and was raised. That's 2 Corinthians 5:14 through 15. Let's read that again. For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died, and he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him, who for their sake died and was raised. I want to slow down and look at the word controls, because the version of this I had absorbed for years was the version that made controls sound like a softer word, as forces. As if the love of Christ was a more pleasant version of the obligation I was already feeling. That's not what's being said. The translation behind controls is closer to holds together or moves from within. Holds together or moves from within. It is not the constraint a leash puts on an animal. It is the gravity that holds a planet in orbit. The planet does not feel the gravity as restriction. The gravity is the reason the orbit is possible at all. The person who has received the covering, who has understood what the cross actually cost and what it actually accomplished, doesn't keep the commandments because the rules require it. They keep them because love requires it. And love is not experienced as the burden the way obligation is. If you would turn to Galatians 5:13. Galatians 5:13. For you are called to freedom, brothers, only do not use freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. You know, a lot of times we think about freedom that God has given us through Jesus as being freedom from sin, and it is that. But more than that, it's freedom to love the way that Jesus did. It's freedom to do the things that we've been commanded because of the love that God had for us. You think about that way. Love to do good. Love to do the commandments that yield good, rather than the freedom from sin. And that freedom that we are to use, we are not supposed to use it as the opportunity for flesh, but through love to serve one another, to be present in each other's lives, to care for one another, to take care of each other. to have a relationship with one another, to get to know one another, to pray for one another, to cry for one another and with one another. Paul is doing the same thing that John does as 2 Corinthians. The freedom is real, the serving is real, the driver between them is love. Through love, serve one another. The serving is not the cancellation of the freedom is the condition that makes the serving the expression of love instead of the discharge of obligation. The obedience that is felt heavy is almost always obedience being sustained by the wrong driver. If you're trying to earn what has already been given, or maintain what cannot be lost by performance, or prove to yourself and others that you belong, you're wearing the yoke as a prisoner. The yoke is not different. The field is not different. The driver is. So the shame was covered, which means there is nothing left to earn. The cross was sufficient, which means the performance record is not the ground of belonging. The love of God actually received, not just affirmed as doctrine, actually received is what converts the wearing from labor to life. It's a new way of living. That conversion is what Jesus is describing when he says the yoke is easy. Not a yoke that requires nothing. What the yoke feels like when it is worn by somebody who loves the one walking beside them. Are we walking beside each other together in harmony with God's will? Is that our daily purpose? Do we love God enough to say that everything else falls apart? But what it is that we've been called to through Jesus? That the most important thing in our life, that our identity that we have, that's been given by God through Christ, that's the most important thing that we wake up and rise to each day? Because if that's how we feel when we wake up, that yoke is going to feel easy. Because we're going to be excited to do the things that God has set before us in His commandments. Pleased to do them. And it challenges you. It challenges you to ask the question, do I love God as much as I need to love God? So let's talk about the three commands in one movement. Jesus gives three commands in the passage. They are sequential. The second requires the first. The third requires both. Come. The first command is movement of approach, not the moment of arrival. The person who comes does not need to have completed any of the prior work to begin. They come laboring. They're heavy laden. The loads they brought with them do not disqualify the coming. The coming is the beginning of the substitution, not the evidence that is already complete. We have to move towards the yoke and want to put the yoke on. What the coming requires is direction. If you've been managing your own load, carrying your own case, filing or filling your own silence with things that you shouldn't be filling it with, you have been moving in a direction that was not towards Him. And the coming is the reorientation of that movement. You have to be able to let go of things to hold on to things that are more important. The hands can only hold so much. And like we mentioned, when your hands are shut, they're not as useful as when they're open. You cannot give something when they're closed, and it's hard for you to take something when they are closed. We must open our hands so that we can give and we can receive. The first step of a change direction is often indistinguishable from any other step. In other words, it doesn't always feel like you're moving towards something that's easy. But the direction is what determines the destination. Take my yoke. The second command is movement of reception. The yoke must be taken, not observed. You can't just look at it and go, okay, that's great, it's helping me out by looking at it. That's not how it works. And it's not a concept referenced in conversation. These are not taking the yoke. You can say, I'm taking up the Lord's yoke this morning. What does that mean? Taking it means putting it on. And when you're putting it on, you're subjecting yourself to the authority of the one that is leading you. Which means that everything that you have that's baggage that you're bringing along, when you get there, that's when we need to let it down. And we need to let him lead. We need to submit to the instrument, and we need to enter the pairing, which redistributes the weight. And entering the pairing means releasing the load we brought, because those two things can't happen at the same time. You cannot be your old self and be the new self, can you? You can't. Now, you can try, but it's exhausting in life to do that. It's exhausting. The taking is where the substitution happens. The shame released to the covering that it was designed for, that we talked about. The self-surrender daily to the denial the cross makes possible. The thing that we add into the silence to take us away from our obligation to be close to the Lord. The file that's in our head that we haven't let go of. And stepping out of the cocoon that we talked about earlier this morning in the struggles to be comforted by the things in the world. We have to lay all those things aside. We have to fully and completely commit to letting go. And it's an ongoing discipline of taking up the yoke, the daily choice about which burden is being borne. Which one do you want to wear? Last, learn from me. The third command is ongoing movement of the yoke life. When we are following and yoked to Jesus, we will change. We will go places that he wants us to go that we may not want to go. He may take us to places inside of our life that need to change because he knows that we need to go there. God's word is the thing that helps us work in that furrow. To know what needs to be planted into our hearts when it needs to be planted, and the fruit that it's supposed to bear. The learner is the one who stays in the position of learning rather than graduating out of it. There's no moment on earth when we step outside of the yoke. The yoke is a lifelong commitment. And we all know what happens to some degree, either personally or from an observational perspective, what happens when somebody steps out of the yoke for good. And they say, I'm not wearing the yoke anymore. I'll take my chances with what's happening here. The one being yoked is the teacher. And what is being learned is not primarily information, it is a posture. The posture of the one who has held his position loosely and descended. Jesus descended, therefore in that yoke we descend too, which means that we give more of ourselves. We let go of who we are today to become more like Jesus the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. It's constantly a state of letting go of ourselves to be what Jesus was, all the way to death, giving up everything that he had. To become the posture of one who washed the feet from a position of complete authority. The posture of one who for the joy set before him endured the cross, who ran the ledger and found the coming glory sufficient to sustain the going through it. And that last piece, Matthew 11:29, and you will find rest for your souls. The rest for our souls may not happen here. We get confused about that sometimes. There is rest to be had here through God's provision. But the ultimate rest that we see Jesus getting through to that point past the cross was the rest that we're all going to have when we're all pulled back together into him, into eternity. In this point, the rest of a person whose work is no longer driven by fear or compulsion or the cargo strapped beside the yoke, the rest of the yoked animal who has stopped trying to carry the field alone and submitted to the pairing, you will find it, not manufacture it, not earn it, not arrive at it by sufficient effort, find it. It is already there waiting for you. So before this sermon ends, I want you to do something inside of it. And we've done this as a practice in some of these other sermons that we've had. I want you to think about your load that you're carrying right now. and the weight that brought you to the yoke that you have not yet put down, that you're trying to manage outside of the yoke at the same time that the yoke is there present with you. I can tell you this much, that it might seem like that this is just really easy to do, to let go of things, set things down. But the honest truth is it's a struggle every day sometimes, isn't it? Day by day. The world works against us. And I'll be honest with you, Satan doesn't want us to succeed. He's right there to remind us each day of the things that we let go of. He's there to remind us of the things that we think we've fixed. Sometimes those things come back. We're going to read it one more time. Matthew 11:28 through 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I told you guys at the start about moments when I didn't think that I could give anymore. The work, the children, the congregation, the wanting to go back to that life where you're just receiving things and not giving as much, where the obligation is lower. Maybe expecting somebody else to step up. The list of things to carry that was more than what my wife and I could actually hold. Things are harder when we are focused on ourselves rather than others. When you're just looking at yourself and all the things you're going through, I can tell you right now, you're going to have a hard time letting go of it. But when you set yourself aside, when you really decide to set yourself aside and put others first, it helps you to let go of those things. Those things become less important in your life. And yes, we still have moments whenever we revert back to the way we were before, but that is why Jesus is so beautiful in our life. It's because he died to give us an opportunity to be forgiven of the things that we confess. And the hope is that we've accepted that opportunity and that we're examining ourselves daily to ask that question, Lord, what more can I give you? When we were talking about the escalation of demand that God gives to those that are following him and the love that requires it, the more you love God, the more you're going to give up yourself. Jesus gave up everything. Unimaginable. And we struggle to try to understand it. I'm still learning what the yoke actually weighs when it's worn alone. I want to say that plainly. Those moments still come around. The list of things that I carry still along. The temptation to ponder that pew life is still there. There are nights when my wife and I talk about whether it's sustainable. And we're honest with each other about it. And what I've learned to do in those moments is something so small, it took me a while to recognize it as a practice. I stop. I do not start the engine of the next thing. I let the question come. And this is a question for all of us this morning. What am I carrying right now that I was never asked to carry? Is there something that I need to let go of? We've gone through all of these things, these alongside loads that we need to let go of. Shame, the self, the idol in our hands, the grievance, premature exit released from the cocoon. But Jesus says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think it's probably worth saying this, that when we leave this building today, I hope that the things that we have studied and the things that we have examined within ourselves has taken hold. Sometimes we say things as preachers, sometimes we say things as those that are evangelizing in the world, and we say everything that we need to say, we think, and we pour ourselves out, and it doesn't take. And maybe there's a place in your heart right now that you're challenged with. And we have, as a tradition, an invitation to come. And in that invitation, what we're asking you to do is to examine yourself and say, is there anything that you can do better? If there's something in your life that you can do better, in your heart, in your personal devotion to the Lord, do it. Don't wait. We don't know when life is going to be over for us. Life is taken away in a blink of an eye. And sometimes things like that happen. We need to make sure that we're ready to go. We need to make sure that we are careful about our thoughts as we leave. And to extend the invitation to those that have not yet been baptized, to those that are on the edge of the water, that are uncertain about what your place is in the kingdom. There's a place for everyone in the kingdom if you will come and put on the yoke that Jesus offers us. There's a process to do it. We hear, we believe, we repent, we confess, and we're baptized in the waters to die to ourselves and to rise to walk in newness of life. So if you're subject to the word of the Lord in any way, we would ask you to come as we stand together and sing this invitation song.